Hello, welcome to White Davy Gardening and Worm Farm. I don't know what I did when I was doing my previous live, but my hand obviously did something accidentally to the screen, so I have a very awkward looking screen at the moment. I don't even know how to correct it, but anyway, I can see your comments, so that is good. I'll just silence this device. Okay, and we're good to go. Okay, so today we are going to be discussing just a little bit about worm farming, and we are, to be more exact, we're going to be discussing more about worm castings. And please feel free to share your experience with your worm castings if you are someone who uses worm castings, and if you are someone who is just getting familiar with worm castings and you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Questions that I cannot answer, I'm sure there might be someone on the live who will be able to answer these questions for you. So thank you all for being here. Now, I am so happy for the day that I discovered worm castings because I have seen so much improvement in my garden since I started vermicomposting that when I think back to gardening before worm castings, like I can't see myself living without worm casting if I'm going to be growing a garden. Yes, so I wish that all the farmers and all of the gardeners would be become familiar with worm casting because the benefits of it is so much. It is very well worth the effort. Yes. And so I'd recommend that if you are someone who do not have what it takes to raise your own worms, if you are able to source castings from suppliers around you or from a friend, then I'd recommend that you do so because you will see a drastic difference in your garden the moment you start using worm castings. So, okay, and White, you're saying hi. Yes, sorry about that. I started talking without replying to you. How are you doing? Okay, so yes, so as I was saying, it's good if you can't raise worms for whatever reason, sometimes the person might not be able to raise worm because they don't have the time to do so, even though raising worm does not really require a lot of time. It's only when you're going to go commercial that worm farming really takes a lot of time, space, depending on how much worms you are raising, that is going to determine the amount of space that you're going to need. And then there are those who simply are not really interested in raising the worms, but then they would like the benefit from the worm casting. So you can always source the worm castings from suppliers around. Now, worm farming has been becoming more and more popular over the years, and so chances are you might be able to find it in your community or communities close to where you are. If not, it can be found online, but definitely I'd recommend that if you have never used worm castings, you try it out. Guarantee you won't regret it. And especially if the source that you are getting the worm casting from is one that produce the castings for themselves rather than becoming a third party seller, because then such ones in most cases will be giving you close to 100% worm castings Of course, 100% worm casting is, chances are there going to be some amount of organic matter in there that's not processed, but that amount can be minimal. Yes. Oh, hi, Leafy Wiggy. Oh, hi, Mom. Okay, so let's see. Leafy Wiggy says, I had to save my worms from drowning in cantaloupe juices. I have hundreds of cocoons in my castings that I have to figure to separate. Okay. I'm glad you were able to save them. It would be sad if they drown without you even noticing. That can be heartrending when you lose your worms. And take it from me, I know. At one point in time, I had what, 20 pounds of worms. And in the space of 2 months, I was left with about 4 pounds of worms. So it can be heartrending when you lose your worms. And even if it is just a few of them, it's still sad. So I'm glad that you were able to rescue them. And that is always the danger, though, of feeding the worms food source that are high in liquid. One has to always pay close attention to the bin because you never know. I forgot about them after feeding for 3 days. It was getting a little smelly. Okay. Well, thankfully, you remembered them in time and was able to rescue them. Now, did you know that worm casting is not just good for providing nutrients for your plants, but it is also very good at helping plants that are unhealthy? Yes, it is very good for helping plants that are unhealthy. For example, I have some tomato plants that were not doing well. I know they have enough nutrients, but I don't know what it is that was causing them to look really sick. And so I decided that I'm going to test the worm casting because I've always heard that it is very good at helping plants that are unhealthy. So between the two plants, I put casting on one and I did not put casting on the other one. I was amazed at the difference of the plants in a few days. It was amazing to see the plant look almost as if nothing was wrong with it when I added the casting to it. Now, what are some of the ways that you guys have used worm castings? What are some of the things that you use worm castings for? So, the plants that I mentioned earlier, that I used the worm casting to see if it would help to restore the plants to its youthful vigor. Yes, I was quite impressed to see how quickly it actually started looking better because the plant, the leaves were curling, the plant was yellowing, and the plant looked as if it was actually going to die. And I know it has enough nutrients because the amount of nutrients that I added to my to my raised bed before I actually planted in there was a lot. At least, as you guys know, I added way too much compost and it was burning my plants. So anyway, so therefore that the plants had more than enough nutrients. But I don't know what it is. I don't know if maybe insects or some form of pest was affecting the plants, what it was, but it looked almost as if it was going to die. Now, within the space of 3 days of putting the worm castings around it, and I didn't even put a lot of worm castings, I use a very small amount because worm casting has so much nutrients, you don't really have to put a lot around your plants. So I put just a little around it and water it in. And I make sure that I water the plants every 3 days so that the nutrients can go into the plants a little quicker. Hi, Kiki Soto. Yes, in 3 days, it was amazing to see how the plant had revitalized. In fact, it didn't even just restore the plant to its youthful vigor. Within 3 days, the plant was actually taller than the one beside it, and both plants were about the same height when I added the castings to one of them. So, for this reason, this is one of the reasons why I'm saying it is so important as a gardener to try and gain access to worm casting, whether by producing your own or by sourcing it from suppliers around you, because trust me, it is well worth it. Now that I think about it, I think I'm going to make some worm tea and try it around those plants that I showed you in, I think that was yesterday's video, where I'm having the issue with what possibly could be curly top virus. I think I'm going to make some worm tea. I have some brewing at the moment. I think I'm going to use it on those plants and see if it's going to help to revitalize them. I'm not sure if it is the curly top virus that these plants are having, but there's a possibility because I see some of the insects that cause the curly top virus, the leaf hoppers. So I'm going to try and apply some of the worm tea tomorrow and see what happens over the course of a week. Hopefully it will help, but you never know. So, for those of you who have been using worm castings or worm tea, have you ever noticed any difference in your garden? Have you ever tried using it in some areas of your garden and then not using it in some and compare the difference? Or if you have never done that, since you started using worm casting in your garden, have you seen any difference in this growing season compared to the other seasons when you weren't using worm castings? Now let's talk a little bit about oxygen in worm farm or in worm castings, that is. Now, beneficial bacteria that are found in worm castings, they love oxygen. And so it is important that you make sure that you have a good airflow in your worm castings. You want to have a good airflow in your worm bin, and you want to have a good airflow after you've harvested your castings. You have to maintain a proper airflow. So when the when the worm castings that you have harvested have a good supply of oxygen, there will always be these oxygen loving bacteria that is in the harvested castings. So these bacteria, they're going to be feeding on whatever organic matter remain in your worm castings. As they feed, they're going to be multiplying. Some of them are going to be dying off because that is the natural process of life. But then they are going to keep on multiplying. Now, if you don't have the proper airflow in your worm bin, sorry, in the castings that you have harvested, these beneficial bacteria, they're going to die off and they're going to be replaced by anaerobic bacteria. Now, this is something you definitely don't want to have in your garden. You in your worm castings, it has to have the proper airflow because so many different life forms are in your castings, and all of these life forms are depending on the oxygen. Oh, hi, Peggy. Let's see. So you are in zone 9B, and you said your garden have improved with the use of worm castings and leash it over the last 12 years. Okay, good. Yes, that's pretty good. So it's nice when other people talk about the benefits of worm casting because then they see that it's not just my words. There are others who have experienced the benefits of worm tea and worm castings over the years. Peggy, she should know more than I do because I've only been vermicomposting about 4 years. She's been doing it for 12 years, so she'll have far more experience than I do where that is concerned. Now, not only will you lose, oh, hi, Russell. Not only will you lose the beneficial bacteria and other insects that depend on oxygen in your worm castings, but if you don't have these beneficial bacteria in your casting, it is going to significantly affect the quality of your worm casting. So you want to ensure that you have the proper airflow after you have harvested your castings. Now, sometimes depending on how many worms you have and depending on how much food scraps you're feeding them or the size of your garden, sometimes you may find that you have castings that last more than a year. Now, worm casting can last up to 3 years, after which it starts to lose its vitality. It is still good, but not as good as in the first 3 years. So, how can you keep your worm castings aerated? It is a good idea to make sure that one, you either not tighten the lid of the container that you are keeping your castings in, or you can put holes in the top of the in the lid, or you can put holes in the sides of the container so that you can have a proper airflow. Right. Now, what about moisture for your worm castings that you have harvested if you have excess castings that you're going to be storing? Now, this is also very important. You need the airflow, you need moisture. The microbes that are in your soil, they need moisture. They cannot survive without the moisture. So if you allow your worm castings to dry out, then you're going to be losing the microbes that are in your worm castings. Now, when you have a worm bin, the worms require about 80% moisture in their bin. That's not the case with the worm casting. Once you have separated the castings from the worms, the casting does not require that much moisture. It just need to be damp. As long as it is damp, that is good enough. So just a little spritz of moisture here and there every now and then, that will be enough to keep the casting moist enough. No, you don't want to allow your castings to dry out at all, because once you allow the castings to dry out, you cannot revive the castings. The nutrients is still going to be there, the casting is still going to be good, but all of the beneficial life form that is in the castings, that you're going to lose. That is very, very important for your plants. In fact, it is the beneficial in organisms that are in your worm casting that makes it superior to just regular compost. Of course, regular compost do have living organism in it, but the worm casting has a lot more beneficial organism living in it. So you have to make sure that you keep your worm castings aerated properly and moistened properly. Now with the castings, as I mentioned, you can have holes in your container, but from time to time, it might be a good idea to turn the compost in whatever container you're storing it in, because you don't want the situation where, especially if you're storing in something deep, you don't want the situation where the top of your casting is getting a nice supply of airflow, but then the bottom of the castings is not getting any airflow. And sometimes these things can compress with time. So it's a good idea to aerate it occasionally. It doesn't have to be very often. It can be once a month, once every 2 months or so, but you don't want it to stay sitting for extended period of time without ensuring that it is getting the proper airflow. Now, here's a question for those of you who do vermicomposting. Have you ever experienced a situation where your casting become rock hard like cement? I have heard of it happening to quite a few worm farmers. I've seen it in my worm farm, but the amount that I see is not something that I can complain about, because usually I would find maybe just a little clump about the tip of my finger that is rock hard, as if it is cement that has been mixed and hardened. Have you ever experienced that? Let's see. Russell says, on a small scale, a 5-gallon bucket with lid and four and 4/4 inch holes at the cardinal points, 1/4 inch under or below the lid. Okay, yeah. Okay, good information. Thanks for sharing that, Russell. Yes, so once your castings become rock hard like cement, the bad news is that you cannot revive it. It, I don't know what is the cause of it. It's a question that many worm farmers have been asking for decades, but I don't know if there are actually any scientists or those who study worm farming, if there have been any research done as to figure out what it is that caused it to happen. So up until this point, we still don't really know what is the cause of it. But once it gets hard, you cannot revitalize the casting. In fact, you cannot break it apart. If you can break it apart, it is with much difficulty and it's still going to be clumpy. So pretty much once that has happened, your casting is lost. Now, what can you do to help prevent this from happening? There is some recommendation that can be followed that might help. It's not very often that you hear of situation where these castings become rock hard, but it has happened, and there are some people who have experienced it more than once. Now, one person who have experienced this, what he recommends is that when you have your castings that you have produced, do not allow it, once it is wet, do not allow it to sit for very long period of time without aerating it, loosening up the castings, because once the castings become compact, and it is wet and it is allowed to dry out, once it dry out, it becomes that hard lump. So it's recommended that you fluff up your castings from time to time and dry it out to a certain level of moisture. You don't want it to be as wet as when you are raising worms in it. You want it to be just damp. Yes, and it is recommended that if when you are harvested your castings, rather than just throwing out the container and just leaving it there to dry out a bit, so fluff it up and keep on fluffing it. Don't just leave it there, because once you leave it there, the chances are that this is going to happen to you. Some worm farm containers or worm farm bins encourage this to happen more than others. So if you have those flow through systems that tapers down and get smaller towards the bottom, these encourage the castings to become compact, and so that increase the chances of that happening. So when you use these systems, it's a good idea to harvest your casting as often as possible. And in addition to that, not only these ones that tapers, but when you do surface feeding with those flow through system, whether the bottom tapers, yes or no, the worms tend to move up as they finish the material that is on the bottom. The more material you add to the surface, the more the castings that is formed on the bottom is going to be compact. So whatever system you use, especially if it is a flow through, you want to be harvesting your castings as often as possible. Another thing that you can do is keep record of how often you harvest your castings, how often you feed your worm bins. Keeping records help you to remember that you have a worm farm that you need to tend to, because you know how it is, we're all busy, so from time to time we might forget that we have the worms to look after. Sometimes we do not forget, but we are so busy that we just can't find the time. By keeping record or by putting it on a schedule, a written schedule, that from time to time you can see the schedule, that can help you to ensure that you don't forget about the worms. Because some of who complain that they have experienced this hardening of their worm castings, some of them say they experience it because they forget about the worms. Some have forgotten about the worms for a month, 2 months, or more. And as you may know, depending on the temperature that and the humidity in your environment, sometimes these bins dry out really fast. It does not take long. And that also depends on whether your bin is shallow or deep. It also depends on whether you're feeding your worms food scraps, compost, or whatever the case may be. So a lot of factors are affecting, or a lot of factors can affect your worm castings. Let's see. Russell says casting that go hydroponic are great for top dressing. They hold in moisture underneath the castings and allow the plants to grow a root mat at the top of the root system. Let's see. Great for top dressing. They hold in moisture underneath the castings and allow plants to grow a root mat at the top of the. Okay. Okay, thanks for sharing that information, Russell. That is good to know. Yes, that is very good to know. All right, so I don't know if there's anyone researching, any of the scientists that look after worm. I don't remember what they are called. I don't know if there's anyone researching this to find out why it happens. I've even heard of situation where people apply the castings to their garden, and then the casting that they apply to the surface becomes rock hard. But it would be nice if we could find out what the cause is and how we can actually prevent it. Okay, Leafy Wiggy says kind of like a cover crop of castings. Yes, it would be nice to find out. Do you guys know any scientists or whatever they're called that actually study vermicomposting? There is one that I know. Well, I don't really know him. I only contact him by email. But I would like to get in contact with quite a few of them because I have so many questions, and sometimes I get a lot of questions that I cannot answer. So it would be nice if you guys know any, if you are willing to share their information with me so I can get in touch with them, because this is something that I really would like to find out why it really happens. Is it a chemical reaction that takes place? What is it that actually causes it? It would be interesting to find out. And speaking of which, I got to take a little bit of notes here so that I don't forget. Bear with me as I try to write with my right hand. Okay, that took forever. One sentence. Yeah, but anyway, nothing I can do about that. Okay, so now I've gone through all the information that I have prepared for you guys today. Yeah, you might get tired of me apologizing, but I have to keep apologizing to you because I'm left-handed and I damaged my left hand and I don't know when I'm going to get the use of it back. So doing research and putting the information together for you guys is very difficult. What usually takes me about 3 hours when I'm using my left hand to prepare the information for my live, but given that I'm writing that information, now it is taking me like 9 hours, 10 hours to prepare the same amount of information. So sometimes I might not have that much time to give you all the information that I would normally give, but I'm still gonna try my best to make sure that my videos and my lives are informative so that you guys can continue to benefit from it. And of course, it would be nice too if you guys with a lot of experience or even a little bit of experience can share your information so that the newcomers to worm farming or to gardening can benefit from it as well. Okay, so what's new with you guys? I am still here struggling and hoping to get some rain. My garden is taking a beating. I can't believe for the entire growing season, as a matter of fact, from spring started, we've had rain twice. One of the days when we got rain was pretty good. I got three totes, 3,000 gallon of water collected. And the other times, the rain is so minimal that I don't even know if it makes a difference. So we're still here struggling to keep our plants watered. I hear that somewhere in this province they got rain a few days ago, but we didn't even get an inclination of rain. Did you get any rain, Leafy Wiggy? Yeah, we're still struggling. No rain. All we're getting is another heat wave that started a few days ago. Hopefully, it won't last. I don't know if that is what is encouraging all these pests in my garden. Oh, you didn't get any either. Yeah, too bad. I don't know if and when we're gonna get rain, but this is the worst I've ever seen. Like, we had drought last year, I think it was last year or the year before. It wasn't anything like this. Usually, even if you have drought, you would have maybe a few days when you get rain, but nothing. From spring, from March until now, nothing, just 2 days. And for those 2 days, it's like an hour rain or 15 minutes rain. So anyway, hopefully with time, we'll get some because my containers are empty. Let's see. Peggy says, I like to use a cup of castings in a gallon of rainwater. I don't have a problem with casting hardening. Okay, that's good. That's good. But you're always harvesting your casting and paying attention to your bin, so I guess that reduces the chances of you having your casting hardening. Okay, you're getting rain a few days a week this month. That's nice. That's awesome. Let's see. Yes. And why it says we only just stopped getting rain a few days ago. Okay, that's good too. Because I mean, sometimes the rain is good, but too much of it can be bad. So it's nice to get a break from it. But I think we are getting too much of an extended break in my region. I can just imagine how the water bill is going to be high. Yeah. Thankfully, thankfully, I spent the time last fall to put those wood chip mulch in my garden because otherwise my plants would be drying out so badly. But wood chip is helping me a bit. So what are you guys up to for the rest of the day? Peggy says, I harvest a tray once a month and get about 18 to 20 pounds. Oh, that's a nice harvest. It's a very nice harvest. And you do that monthly. That's good. This year I end up with far more castings than my previous year, so I have lots of castings sitting in sitting in my garage. I don't know what I'm going to be doing with all of that castings. It's quite a lot at the moment. Yeah. Anyway, I think if there's no further comment, I am going to say goodbye to you guys. Okay, Becky says my red wigglers are happy little chops. Well, you keep them well fed and well moist, so naturally they're going to be happy. And I guess that is why they're making you so happy that you can collect 18 to 20 pounds of castings each month. I've never weighed my castings, come to think of it. Yeah, I've never weighed my castings. I always just measure it in terms of gallon, but I've never really weighed my castings. How much to measure it and see how much a gallon of castings weigh. I know, of course, it's gonna depend on the amount of moisture that is in the castings because castings can hold up to 3 times its weight. So that's gonna determine the weight of the casting. But it would be interesting to see how much a gallon weigh using the method that I use to raise my worms. Anyway, you guys, take care, and I hope to see you again on Monday. I'm gonna try to start preparing my live over the weekend so that I'll be able to provide you with more information. So until I see you again, I hope you have a really wonderful weekend and that you will enjoy your garden. That's just a guess. 5 big foggers, coffee cans. Oh, okay. Okay. Okay, you take care too, Mom.